Starting the recording. Hey, hello, and welcome to the first design debate. Um, I am Old Castle, or Nat. I'm joined here with three of my guildmates, and we're going to be discussing World of Warcraft's latest expansion and their implementation of what they have covenants and the covenant abilities. We are uh, members of Dinosaur Cowboys on Area 52, and our guild is kind of uniquely positioned in that we have a foot in the hardcore world, and then we also kind of have a foot in the more casual atmosphere in that we only raid 2 nights a week for a total of 8 hours. So we kind of have point of views for both sides of the camp here as to whether or not Covenant abilities should be swapped freely or should not be swapped freely. So I'm going to introduce my guildmates who are with me. Certainly two of them should really need no introduction whatsoever if you are at all a member of the Mythic Plus community. We have Luigi Sama and Tiny Fat Bird. Luigi is a very proficient arms and protection warrior, I believe. You're up to what now in Raider.io?
Like 1 point or 5.2, 5.3. Nothing crazy, but high up there.
Crazy, yeah. Okay. And then Tiny is actually one of the few people in the world who has broken 5K in every single one of their classes specs, if I'm correct. Is that correct, Tiny?
Just 4K. It's 4K every spec as Druid, and then I'm like my overall score is like 5.2 or so, and that's combining both tank score, healer, and DPS.
Cool. So they're very uniquely positioned to discuss the impact of how these covenant abilities and the player power that comes from them is going to affect them and their play style in the game overall. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you have myself and Janai. I am the guild master and one of the raid leaders of Dinosaur Cowboys. Like I was saying before, we're a casual 2-night-a-week guild. We do obtain cutting edge every tier at a reasonable pace. And that's kind of our main goal from tier to tier, but we do keep an eye and desire to be competitive to a certain degree. So performance is always something we're looking at when we're comparing our raiders, and personally when I'm deciding who's going to be in, who's not going to be in, all the ins and outs and things that Ian and others have talked about, how these covenant abilities are going to affect them. And Janai is a longtime friend of mine. He has a master's degree in computer science, and he has worked for gaming companies and has developed his own game as well. And he's going to be kind of arguing the more casual point of view with myself that covenant abilities are quote unquote fine as they are and should not be freely swapped. So,
hello.
Given that covenant abilities are currently not something you can freely swap, we're going to shift over to Luigi and Tiny first so they can present their argument as to why they think they should be swapped.
Sure. So I guess I'll give it a go here. I just got beta this week, and I had the opportunity to make, a warrior on each of the different covenants. And I have to say, each covenant, definitely feels unique. It definitely feels really cool. In my mind, having to choose one covenant and pick it, aesthetically, I think that's a great idea. But when you attach player power to it, that's where things get complicated because, as someone who likes to push higher end content like Mythic Plus or Raid, I want to choose the one that's better. So I feel like Blizzard is taking the cool choice away from me and forcing me to pick the one that's better for the content that I'm doing, right? So the argument against it, I suppose, is that the player base is mostly casual. But I'd make an argument, I don't know the numbers exactly, but I want to say maybe 10% of the players are either the top tier pushers or people that are copying what they're doing in keys. And if casual players, it doesn't matter what they pick, right? They don't really care. They're probably picking it for the aesthetics over the power. Why should Blizzard ignore the other 10%? Everyone could be happy if covenants would be swappable, right? The casual player or already has what they don't care, right? They don't care about the power. So if it's swappable, it appeases both sides in my mind. That being said, like I think there's some middle ground. Like I don't think that um, everything needs to be swappable. Like maybe Blizzard can input some sort of system where uh, like you pick one initially that's like that's your main covenant, and then once you're in that covenant there's some sort of progression or something you can do to sort of slowly unlock the other covenants. And I also think maybe another sort of compromise would be that I think the soulbind system is really good. Like the actual conduits are the same, right? You have the DPS conduits, so it doesn't matter, what covenant you choose. You can put any of those covenant or the conduits in the respective slots, regardless. And after having a look at most of the actual soulbind characters, like the abilities like aren't game breaking. They're very minimal in terms of DPS. Like a lot of them are more just convenience type things. So, I think it's just like that main covenant ability that matters. Like just to give you like a quick example, um, I have an arms warrior that's Venthyr on beta, and I have a fury warrior that's Kyrian on beta. And I did some keys on both, and I did raid on my arms warrior, and like the raid feels so good on arms, but it feels terrible in Mythic Plus. Like whereas Kyrian feels amazing. So, that's sort of like my idea in a nutshell is like I think it would be great if there could be one main covenant that's your choice. You're stuck with those soul binds. You can't get other covenant soul binds, but maybe you can unlock other covenant powers like in the because if you think about it, right? Just my last point is that everyone so far in the Shadowlands is like each covenant is working towards like the jailer, right? They're trying to, overcome like what's going on in the maw and all that stuff. So all covenants are aligned in that aspect. So like if you're coming from one main covenant like to another as a representative of that covenant and like just have the ability to swap like to the covenant abilities, but are locked into the soul binds, I think that's like a pretty good compromise that I could get behind. I guess like that's my idea in a nutshell anyway.
Tiny, anything you want to add?
I do want to agree with what Luigi has said. A large portion of player power is tied into these. And I will say in one disagreement, I think a greater populace of the player bases will recognize what is going on, whether any content that you decide to do, whether it be PvE, raiding, Mythic Plus, Arena, Battlegrounds, or even just casual play. I don't think there are very many individuals that will objectively say, I recognize my character is weaker and I'm okay with this. The mentality or thought process that I think a lot of people are saying, well, the numbers won't matter as much. Maybe this might be true. Maybe they get the balancing 100% right and everything feels great, but the context will be one ability may feel really enjoyable to use, Mythic Plus for an example. And then if you go into a raid setting, like Luigi had mentioned, he says from his player perspective, this feels undesirable to use. Maybe it's clunky, maybe its cooldown doesn't line up well, maybe the ability itself is not designed to be used as expressively in like a raiding environment. So the idea that they've already kind of made the flaw of saying that they have a ripcord system that at any time they could just pull it out and say like, okay, this is not what we desire. The player basis really wants it. That really hurts them from that side of it. And it kind of benefits more players than I think just the high end. I think a large portion of the player base will recognize that, if they're in a raiding environment, but then want to do battlegrounds, maybe suddenly they say, I'm okay with having my Night Fae ability, but I want to use whatever it might have been in another one, another soulbind to use, whether it be damage or utility, specifically from those trees. And I think not allowing players to play their characters how they feel they want to be played, because like cosmetics and aesthetics aside, I fully believe that individuals may feel remorse at some point of the expansion in some variation of context of gameplay. I really think that that'll probably be like the big deal that a lot of individuals don't kind of recognize is that at some point, no matter what your character is going to be playing, in theory, it may not be the most desirable aspect for you just because you're locked into a specific covenant.
Yep.
That kind of wraps up what I was saying.
All right, Janai, why don't you? I'll give you an opportunity to reply to what they said first.
Sure. They have a lot of different points. So, but I think I have sort of one thing that I want to bring up that, in a way, focuses the conversation a little bit, but also brings up a lot of the things that they said. They're saying things like picking one covenant feels good in raid but bad in Mythic Plus. Another covenant feels good in Mythic Plus or bad in raid. People might feel remorse about these choices, and all of these things are definitely true. So the thing that I kind of want to talk about a little bit is that in the design of covenants, Blizzard's effectively just creating 48 classes instead of 12. By locking you into a class, you have an by locking you into a class since the start of the game, you have an identity with that class. You say, oh, well, I'm going to be the best druid in the world, or I'm going to be the best warrior in the world. And everything you're saying about, oh, well, they might have remorse about choosing Venthyr. Well, you might have remorse about choosing Shaman, or, oh, this class might be great in Raid, but it's shit in Mythic Plus. Kind of like Shaman, or and there's other examples, of course. What if you pick a class that just isn't good at anything? Like, I think most of the classes have some viability in at least something these days, but that's totally a thing that can happen. So from a standpoint of them just making 48 classes, the game is sort of the same as it's always been. And a lot of the arguments against covenants could similarly be used against classes. So a large portion of my curiosity is kind of trying to figure out where people draw the line. Blizzard's made 12 classes, no more. We want no more classes. We want no more of that. The game is fine as it is. So, or is there some middle ground, or can we have more things that get locked in, or no, because that just ruins everything? I have a lot of other points we can talk about, but I think maybe I shouldn't talk for too long, I think. So, sure. Sal, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I definitely agree that there can be a feels bad moment if you feel like you have the incorrect covenant choice. I would also agree that I think Luigi's estimate of 10% was probably a little bit low as to how many people truly emulate the higher end community and higher end players. It is probably a larger percentage of that. And to kind of speak to what Janaya said a little bit, we can see this take effect in the number of rogues, demon hunters, and at the moment at the end of Nyalotha, just hunters. Kind of populating the game and populating the high-end community. I know managing the recruitment side for our guild, we have an astronomical number of BM hunters just applying to us left and right. And I think that's a nature of kind of what Janai and Luigi were hinting at with the ability to switch what you're doing. The concern for me with being able to swap covenant abilities is more in the realm of balance, and more of the realm of balancing things on Blizzard's side. I don't see how they could balance their game if they are going to make it so that every player can freely switch to a blink on a 1 minute cooldown, or every single player can walk into a fight with a absorb shield on a 1 minute cooldown, or whatever the cooldown happens to be right now, or have a cleanse or the fox dash. I almost think these utility based abilities from each of the covenants are so incredibly powerful, in combination with the class abilities. I'm not sure how Blizzard would be able to balance encounters, and balance Mythic Plus in general, with the ability for any player to walk into progression for a final boss, or any boss really, and just say, hey, every 20 people, everybody here, you must have your Venthyr blink. And I think this goes to what Ian was talking about a little bit in Preach's ability. or it preaches conversation he had with them, where if abilities are that freely swappable, you really don't have a choice anymore. The expectation becomes you must bring what is required to defeat this boss or this encounter with the least amount of friction for the entire group, or the least amount of resistance for the entire group. We must make it the easiest way possible. And I think that actually stifles the game as a whole and stifles a lot of creativity. Um, Obviously, switching your class is not as easy as pushing the button of switching a talent, which essentially, I guess, is what covenants would be if you could just consume something and swap them. Um, so that speaks more to Janai's choice that, unless you're kind of a top end guild like Limit, you can't really realistically demand that every single one of your players have a top level DK or whatever class they happen to be playing geared out of each of the covenants.
I think I have one sentence I want to add to what you just said, which is, as I've been claiming that I'm identifying these as classes, basically, if we can freely switch classes, for example, if someone were to counter argument, oh well, we should just be able to freely switch classes as well, then I mean, what's stopping us from just having 14 fire mages for N'Zoth progression? Like, if we can freely switch Venthyr Covenant to all the other covenants, then everyone's just going to go for the best one. But similarly, if we could freely switch classes, everyone's just going to be a fire mage. It's kind of boring. So
Yeah.
that's the whole point of this diversity.
Yeah, I mean, kind of speaking to that, like I think I think comparing this to a class like isn't really accurate because, one ability and like a couple passives like isn't enough to really compare it to a class. Like I do think ultimately like the class choice is going to be more important than say the covenant that you choose. But and I do agree too with what you're saying, Nat. Like if everything is freely swappable, then yeah, I mean, you're just going to be playing whatever's best all the time, like in whatever encounter you do. But the idea of having a choice, like to think, okay, like I'm going to do this mythic plus and this particular mythic plus, like might have like a lot more single target than AoE. And, there's some extra mechanics that need more survivability. Like having the ability to swap to different things does like actually enables more creativity in terms of the player in choice, in my opinion.
Is it a choice though?
Well, it can be, right? Like
Do
if
you
there's so many
choose your
different
talents
options.
when you go into N'Zoth? Like, did you actively choose which ones you want, or is this the expected and most optimal build because Simcraft told you it was the best?
Well, Simcraft did tell me it was the best for sure. I
Okay.
mean, but the thing with Mythic Plus is like Simcraft is not like always an accurate representation
Sure.
because there's so many different moving parts in Mythic Plus specifically that like maybe one class values survivability more. Maybe like another class needs more single target. Maybe another class needs more AOE to like help them help their class in Mythic Plus. But I think ultimately. I think, even going back to what I said before, um, you know, like there's a middle ground, right? Like there
Hmm.
is a middle ground. And I think to me, the more important things, like in terms of covenants, are their major covenant abilities. Like I personally, based on what I saw, don't think that the soul binds require to be swapped. Like I don't care if those are swappable. Because like I said, the conduits are the same regardless of a covenant.
Right.
Yeah, or the
Yeah, I
conduit,
agree.
yeah, or you choose, right? So you're going to be having those major DPS components regardless of the covenant. Like to me, it's that covenant ability like matters a lot. Like like I said in before, condemn, which is the Venthyr ability for arms, is or warrior period is extremely strong in single target, but like it significantly lacks in AOE. Right. I mean, I haven't been able to test everything, so like maybe there's some build out there that could work. um, but yeah, I mean, like having to choose, like I like rating. I mean, we're not like the pushing world first or anything, but I want to be competitive, like
Sure.
the best I can be, and not being able to do that is like very frustrating. And then you can see too, like you described, like maybe it's more than 10% of the players that actually copy sort of what the top players are doing. Like when you're signing up for keys, like already right now, there's the class component, right? If you're not a meta class, it's very hard to get into keys. Now, if like there's the class component and the covenant component, like it's like an extra layer of complexity that I think it takes away more than it adds. Like especially if someone's like looking at LFG, they're like, oh, it's a mage, like that's a meta class. Oh, but they're not using this proper covenant, and like this is a big deal. We can't invite them. Like you'll get invited to group and then kicked out of the group. Like that's like a
Sure.
concern of mine.
I mean, I felt that when I played Druid a little bit. I mean, because I would certainly second season when I was playing my Feral more, I would definitely join keys, and people would see I wasn't a boomkin, and they would remove me almost instantly. But I mean, it wasn't a regular occurrence, and it
Sure.
probably would be a regular occurrence at your level, but it wasn't at my level. I think Janai actually had some notes to say about this subject as well.
Mm.
You're muted.
Yeah, I have a couple things. So one of the things that was mentioned is the idea of being the best you can be, but that's given the choices that you've made so far, which is I am a warrior. You've chosen to identify as a warrior, but you want to be the best you can be as a warrior. Because you don't want to be the best you can be, because if you wanted to be the best you can be, you wouldn't be on anything other than a prot warrior, I
Right.
suppose.
As the class you select.
Right.
Right.
So why can we not be the best I can be as a covenant and a class?
You could be.
Right.
I mean, you could be, but like it's just that extra level of frustration. Like I've already chosen my class.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to have to then choose the right covenant. Like that's just like another very significant choice, like on top of the class, that I don't want to like have tied, be tied to forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's just my take on it, really.
Yeah, I get that. I guess what I want to figure out, I kind of just want to get to the bottom of that, if that makes sense. Like that, what you're saying is an opinion, and so I want to see what the sort of precedent like that, or if it's just an irrational fear that won't really play out when the expansion comes out.
Yeah.
If it comes out as it is, right?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, Blizzard has said that they plan on balancing these like as closely as possible, right? But when and if they can do that, great. Like I don't care about the player power anymore. If they're all within 0.5% of each other, regardless of the content you're doing, great. I'll support covenants as they are.
Well,
But
to be clear, I think they're going to be as balanced as classes are right now, which is to say, not at all. So
right.
So I guess what
agree.
I'm trying to get to the bottom of then is why does that matter? If we can be happy being this class or that class or this or that, why can we not be okay with covenant class, covenant class, covenant class?
If I can interject to it,
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say, like, in the mentality that I think Luigi and I have is you can take it from the most simplistic of rating environments. Let's take like heroic or normal rating environment. And if we liken the idea of covenants to being borrowed power systems, we can take it in the context of just really simply breaking it down to essences. You take an identity where like Luigi goes into raid with, say, Blood of the Enemy, a more predominantly single target focused essence. And then his counterpart or his opposite now Covenant, which would be, say, Focus Iris. These two are radically different abilities in the idea of it. Now, again, this is our borrowed power system. So one Covenant is heavily AoE, one's heavily single. He may feel better using, say, the Focusing Iris Covenant in 3 out of 12 fights of the raid versus, say 9 out of the 12 with the Blood of the Enemy. And these ideas with this power system is what's going to cause the rift, I think, with individual players for all levels of the game. Eventually, you're going to be in a situation where you're like, this is me personally, I aesthetically like the idea of Night Fae. Like, being a druid is really cool, convoking with the spirits, all that neat nature stuff is enjoyable to me as a player. Now, in that perspective, if an individual is playing, say, a balanced druid, and he wants to play the best balanced druid he can, and he's a heroic raider, or maybe in that kind of realm, he's a standard player that's achieving AOTC, he's going to look on websites like MMO Champion or Wowhead, or he's going to go to guides, or he's going to look at the high-end competitive players, and they're going to say in a recommendation, from a pure number perspective, what we've optimized is to tell you this is what you should be using. And as a player, he now has to make a conscious decision to say, do I then choose the aesthetics of what I desire, or do I choose power? But even choosing this one power, whatever realm he may want to choose it for, BGs, PvP, rating, Mythic Plus, there's areas of the game that are now going to become less colorful, less enjoyable, because I think most players of the game now recognize where their power comes from. I think most individuals on a majority of all levels, from 15 to 20 to 25 to 30s now, in keys, people look at their talents and their essences before they join and say, okay, I maybe want to take this ability because it makes it better overall, or maybe this essence feels better in this dungeon. And I think that's most players doing that. Now, I don't know many players that are really upset they have to use a tome to change a talent for a raid fight, or use a tome or change their talents in PvP. Like, PvPers especially, that, some of us don't necessarily um, have like extreme knowledge in, but we delve into the realm of arenas 2.4, 2.1, somewhere in between there rating wise. You're going to look at that every single game. You change your talents rather, you change your PvP talents, and now you won't be able to change your covenants. Your natural talent or whatever you're going into may feel just not worth pressing even. Now, let's hope from a Blizzard standpoint of balance, they can line these abilities up.
Yeah.
But just generally speaking, from a heroic raider standpoint, I would be very surprised if there's not someone out there that actively recognizes these abilities are better in this specific fight, environment, or situation.
Well, I think that is going to happen. I mean, from what Ian said in the interview, it seems as though they're okay if your covenant choice is weaker in scenario A, B, and C, if it's better than your, counterpart in encounter X, Y, and Z. They seem to be okay with that type of design choice and philosophy. And just to go down your arena analogy a little bit more, because I think another goal that Blizzard's trying to accomplish here is to add more depth to their game by having these extra, if you're saying we're going from 12 classes to 48, just as an example or a term to put on it, when you jump into Arena, you make some snap decisions based on what the add-on tells you you're encountering, right? Like, you could be fighting a Paladin Warlock. You and your partner are instantly making some snap decisions as to how you're going to engage the fight and how it's going to progress from there. Well, now, if you're not allowed to switch your covenants around, you're going to have to make some snap decisions and decide what you're going to do based on what covenant those people have also picked and based on what covenant you have also picked. As opposed to, if they're freely swappable, there's going to be an expectation, especially in the rating rankings that you were talking about, Tiny, that every paladin you encounter in PvP is probably going to have this covenant choice, and it severely diminishes the depth of the game at that rate.
See, I don't necessarily agree with that entirely. I mean, like you said, with the example that encounter to encounter, like in Raid, for example, one covenant would probably be better than the other, and depends on the encounter, right? So like maybe each covenant will have their turn of being the best for a certain encounter, which is like that would be fine for me. Like to me, like where things get sort of difficult is when you're talking about content type. Right. So like if you like talking about like raid versus mythic plus versus PvP, and even specs,
Yeah.
right. So like if I like to raid, I like to mythic plus. I don't really PvP so much, so I won't talk about that. But yeah, in raid and mythic plus, like those are two very different types of content. Like in raid, yes, there's some AoE fights, there's some single target, but like most of the things in raid like are geared towards single target. There's usually some priority target or some boss that you have to kill. Whereas Mythic Plus, there's a lot of trash, a lot of AoE focused stuff. So if I have to choose between one or the other, like that kind of sucks because I like to do both. And then even going another layer is like I don't particularly like tanking, but I do tank a decent amount in Mythic Plus. And
I was gonna say, don't you tank a lot? Wasn't that the role you're more or less relegated to several times? Is because people want you as a tank because you're a warrior?
Yes. I mean, that's the way it is, you know. But my DPS score is higher than my tank score, so it doesn't matter in that regard.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, like I like to tank, and you know, the covenant that I choose, like I'm a DPS main, so of course I'm gonna gravitate towards a DPS like oriented covenant in terms of you know when I'm thinking about what I want to pick. But if I want to tank content, like now my covenant is not the right one. And that's like where it's like not fun. Like it's not fun. Like if you like to do these types of contents and you're stuck playing something that like is not that good or not as good as you could be, it's just not fun. You know?
Sure. So one thing I want to bring up that was brought up a little bit earlier, and I know Janai and I talked about this a little bit. I think if you are not able to freely switch and you are locked into your choice, and yeah, you have, let's say you're walking into or applying to a Mythic Plus group and you've made the quote unquote wrong choice, you're a different covenant.
Sure.
Do you think that people will truly reject you en masse from engaging in that level of content? Because we know that, like you were even saying, your warriors are mostly prot warriors, but your DPS spec is actually a higher rating than your prot rating. And I know Tiny has been able to achieve high Raider IO ratings in all of his specs, and there's actually, he was telling me before, there's actually a player who is reaching what 6K as Feral in EU maybe.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying, that you feel as though you're going to be marginalized if you don't make this right choice. However, these wrong choices already exist to a certain degree in the game by you picking to play the least optimal or less
Yeah.
optimal spec. But these
I
players
completely
are
agree.
capable of doing the things that you say you feel like you won't be able to do.
Right. I mean, to counter that, and I completely agree. I mean, like that's a problem in the WoW community, right? Where they're taking they're not taking player over class. They're taking class over player, and that's just a problem in the community, right? They see MDI, they see what people pushing high keys are, and that establishes the meta. And if you're not the meta, then you're screwed. And I agree. Like that's always going to be the case, right? Regardless of what expansion or what have you. But adding another layer, like going back to what I said before, like Covenants just adds another complexity layer to it. Like I've already picked my class. Like I don't want to have to, you know, I'm already like limited sort of quote unquote based on the meta, based on my class. Like I don't want to then also be limited on my based on or, you know, based on my covenant, right? Like that's something like I sort of liked what Tanya was talking about earlier as well, because this stuff is all borrowed power, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
essences, borrowed power, whatever. It's only going to be here for an expansion, at least you know that's the assumption anyway. So I just like I just don't understand like why it can't be swappable, and like it doesn't have to be like immediately swappable. I mean, I'm not talking about like just flip the switch and everything just goes. Like there's compromise, right? And I think that's something that we can do as a community is to think of like a middle ground, because like Tiny said too, is I like aesthetically like really like you know these covenants, and I think making a choice like based off of aesthetics is great, but like I don't have that choice because there's power associated with it, and I need to pick the strongest power.
Yeah, I
I
guess
think
my point was that you are still going to be able to do everything you want to do no matter which one you pick, because we see
You
people
are.
doing
Mm-hmm.
whatever they
You
want to
are.
do. Maybe you will have to try harder than someone
Sure.
that's playing like a BM hunter now versus Shadow Priest, but
Right.
you can still do it. It's still doable. And I
Yeah.
think the less or the harder it is for a person to reject you for your choice, the easier you're going to have to get into these higher ratings or harder or more intense guilds, because they're not going to be able to freely marginalize you based on your choice as easily, because the population is going to be dispersed far more. I mean, I know
I
Janai
want to
talked.
Mhm.
yeah, I want to add to that a little
Sure.
bit. So I think one thing that we're not talking about also is why does having it lock in? Why is having it lock in even maybe a good idea? We're all talking about why is it not a bad idea or why it is a bad idea, but
Yeah.
we're not even talking about why did they design it this way to begin with. And I think one of the things that Nat said was that, okay, well, people can't reject you if you've locked into this decision ahead of time, in the same way that they, air quotes, can't reject you for your class choice. I mean, they
Not
do
not as
still. They
easily.
do still, but they don't as
definitely
much.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they do, but not as much. I can still get some 15s done as a resto shaman, even though they're absolute dog shit in Mythic Plus. But so the idea of why should this system be locked in to begin with really is that if they don't lock it in, the non-meta choices may as well not exist. They may as well not even make this system at all. They should just give each of us one ability. Actually, Nat, you were saying they could just make, all warriors will be Venthyr warriors. Just done. They know that's going to be the meta choice anyway, so why bother wasting time making the other three? Like, they would be completely pointless. Like, everybody's just going to switch to the best one anyway. So why bother having 4 abilities?
So if I can at least make a caveat to that, I don't necessarily think the idea that all individuals will agree that the power loss is worth it or the power gain is worth it. Meaning I don't think that every individual player is going to say, I have to be this. I think this is a portion of it where Luigi and I feel most passionately because we're playing to maximize their characters as efficiently as possible in most content we enjoy. The downside to this system is that this is a borrowed power that we are receiving. Now, I choose to play a druid. Me personally, I enjoy playing Resto, Feral, Balance, Guardian. There's not many individuals, like Luigi, he'll play Prot Warrior. He's a great Prot Warrior, but that's not what he prefers to do. He wants to, be that two-handed warrior, charge in, slam the battlefield, take everything out in a giant blade storm. That's the DPS mindset. That's fun to your character. You play a warrior, though. So, you understand the balance of your class, and you can play that. At no point in time has there ever been a situation in the game in the last, let's take the context of mop era gear, where now you switch leather from intellect to agility. You can now freely change on a button press. I want to choose my specialization and my gear, my talents, my set bonuses, my Azurite, my essences. All of my existence as a character rolls over to what I choose. This is going to be the first time in a WoW existence since, pre-mop era where they've given us so much freedoms. Blizzard has awarded us as players to play the game as we want to play it. I hit a single button, I'm now a cat. I hit a button, I'm a chicken. I hit a button, I'm a bear. And that idea is really great until now. We're now saying, air quotes, we're giving you a subclass. But to me, this isn't a subclass. This is kind of more along the line of we're kind of almost being shackled now, because we as players are going to take a choice that says, I want either power or aesthetics. And you're going to take power. But again, in this realm of power, this Covenant choice, you're not a Venthyr warrior. You're a warrior who has chosen Venthyr. This idea that these abilities are your, live and die by essences or whatever you want to call them, to me can be a really, really bad slope of balance. Now, in the most utopian era, all classes would be efficient and good. All balances and covenants would be within a marginal variance, 5 damage percent maybe. Then at that point, you're looking at the 1% margin, the most extreme of situations, and I think only the most extreme players would say, I now have to have 4 versions of my warrior or druid or whatever it might be. That era, I don't think will exist except in a small population.
Yeah.
The biggest thing as a takeaway from this is that I think that by restricting us in choosing one located power source, you're now taking your identity and kind of denting it. Luigi really wants to play a DPS warrior, or you really want to play Resto Shaman. So you choose a Resto Shaman thing, but then suddenly, hey, I'm going to DPS today. And then you suddenly realize that this power choice you've made for one aspect of your class, your shaman, your warrior, your druid, your mage, that's the realm. Now, hopefully, this doesn't become a case where it's exactly what you said, and I do agree. For my biggest fear is the idea that every fight you must be this. You must be a Venthyr this. You must be a Necrolord this, and it just keeps compounding and compounding. But the big difference that I can say is kind of like an argument caveat is Fire Mage right now. Fire Mage, everybody recognizes it. From normal players to casual players, that's a class that does a lot of damage. And most mages now are not objectively going to be like, I really want to play Frost. And then the community scorns them. And then their own brain recognizes a side of it. You have to have a very deep dive into that specific line of your class, air quotes class, because if you're playing only a Frost Mage right now, that's a humongous trough of power you're not drinking from. And every player recognizes it. From people who are doing LFR to people doing the most competitive content in the world. That's a choice, though.
Yeah.
But these choices are forever. Like
we're
you
saying the same thing, but coming to different conclusions. I think we're saying that the fact that you can switch to Frost to Fire means that if, for example, they were adding Frost in this expansion, they shouldn't have bothered because nobody would have touched it with a 10-foot pole anyway.
But this is a freely changeable system. You can change that whenever you want. As a player, you recognize your power limits.
Right. But you can't, because you can physically push the button to switch. But you've even said if you were to push that button, you are not drinking from this draught of power that fire mages have. So it's really not much of a choice. You just can't play a frost mage and expect to be taken seriously.
Right.
I mean, that's
which is
true.
Or even casually. I know casual guilds that will renounce their guild mates
and again,
if they don't
this
switch
is
to
my
the right
fear
set.
to the Covenant system.
Well, but if it locks you in, then that's less likely to happen in the same way that people don't care what class you play, even though it's not the best class.
And I would argue it would also force Blizzard to have to balance it a bit more. I mean, I also think we're living in a very extreme moment where they kind of let these corruptions out. They're clearly not balanced very well, and they took classes to extreme levels, and they just said, whatever, the expansion's done, who cares? Let it go.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I
This
think
is just
the
an
game
example too,
is the game is typically balanced decently well, that no matter what spec you're choosing, you can perform at a reasonably high level. Maybe you can't make it to pushing 30s right now, like some people are doing, but you're probably going to be able to get cutting edge in a raid environment. I know we traditionally in the past, we've always told people to play what they enjoy the most and what they perform at the best, as opposed to forcing them to switch. Now, in this current tier, that's not been the case, because if somebody rolls up as an arcane mage or a frost mage, we're like, what the hell? Please switch to fire. We would like to kill the boss. But I mean, yeah.
I think I would add one other thing too is I think we can all agree that the class ultimately is going to trump like anything Covenants would do, right?
Yeah.
The class that you play is going to be the most important thing in terms of what is meta and whatnot. So I think like the people that would suffer the most from choosing the wrong Covenants are those classes that are not the meta class. Because when you're not playing a meta class and you're trying to do, higher content or whatever it is, like it's a lot harder for you to get into groups. Like you have to, you have to do certain things. Like you have to find ways to do more damage or, become more survivable or whatever it is. And if you add the fact that you have a wrong Covenant, like that makes that way worse, because now it's even harder for you to get into a group being an off-meta class because you also have the wrong Covenant. So like I think that's like another aspect to Covenants that's kind of dangerous.
Yeah, but
I don't think of it as dangerous. I think, agreeing with what Tiny said, this is the first time that we've had to lock a choice in since the game came out. You had to choose your class.
Scryer, I think, was
and that's it. Well, you didn't, and that didn't even matter. There was no player power.
Yeah, it was like.
So this is the first time that we've had to lock in a player power effectively for the permanently for the entire expansion. So it seems almost like something that maybe they like learned from Classic. They want to push possibly more of such choices. Where we can't, we won't know for sure until later. But it seems like something they want to try to dabble in again. And talking to what you were saying, Luigi, is in terms of a middle ground, I feel like having one thing that we have to lock in might be that middle ground. Like, we haven't had to lock anything in ever since Classic, and locking things in does things to games that can be interesting. So that's sort of the crux of why it is good. And then why it's
What would
bad.
be the
That's-
one thing? What one
mean,
thing would you lock?
Well, right now it's covenants. You're locked there.
Oh, I thought you were sorry. I thought you were saying like
No, the middle ground is what they've chosen. We haven't
Gotcha.
had a locking mechanism since Classic, so they're saying, well, let's just
Right.
try one thing. It's 2 abilities and some passives. Shouldn't be the end of the world. So let's see what that's like, having one locked mechanic.
yeah. No, I thought you meant like lock one of the 2 abilities. So sorry, that was.
I mean,
my
I guess they
misunderstanding.
could have made it even smaller. They could have just made it like you just lock one of your soul bind. You know, they could have made it really small. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, locking stuff is it's just I don't know. Like obviously, Tanya and I have talked about like our thoughts on it, and I mean, there's a lot of esports tomorrow, right? There's the Mythic Plus, there's the World First Race, I guess doesn't count, but and then there's the PvP. So when these teams are going to be doing this content, they're going on, you know, the tournament realms. They're all gonna be picking like the best covenants, and that's like all you're gonna see. You know, it's just.
For sure. But I
Yeah,
mean, it's the same
and-
way with classes.
Right.
Everything that you've said since the start of this conversation.
I
you could
completely
say the same
agree,
thing.
but like I don't want to choose another class. I've already chosen a class. Like I don't want to have that other layer, which is what I've said before.
I get
And that's where I was talking about the compromise again, like locking in the soul binds. Like if you choose a covenant, your soul binds are locked. And you can't, like if you're swappable to other covenants, like maybe that's an idea. Like if you can swap the major but not the soul binds. Like the soul binds you're locked. And maybe you can switch the covenants. And I'm not saying it has to be like that, like right away. Like that's where I'm trying to like have some middle ground. You
Right.
know? Like you have to do a lot of progression and some quest lines or whatever to unlock, you know, certain covenants in certain order, in like an order that you want. And I think that's reasonable. I just you know have trouble with the whole power of some of these covenant abilities and how different they are in terms of single target versus AOE, and I think it's just going to be very challenging for people who like to do multiple types of content.
Yep. One of the things I wanted to touch on a little bit is I think, for me at least, I was thinking the implication these covenants have on each sphere of endgame gameplay are different. What I mean by that is, for a large amount of the population, when you get cutting edge in a raid, the raid is more or less considered done and relegated to farm. I mean, there is the ability for you to parse on Warcraft logs and be somewhat competitive in that manner. However, in Mythic Plus, that's an infinitely scaling system, right? There's no real endpoint to it. So I feel like in Mythic Plus, you feel the pains of making the incorrect choices a lot more than in Raid.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, raid isn't really competitive other than Race for World First, whereas
Right.
Plus and
Right.
PvP are
Right, yeah,
forever
and that's-
competitive. Yeah.
That's at a player power system. I think a large portion of this too, maybe I don't want to speak for Luigi, you know, directly, but at least my vocalized fears is the idea that we've been asking to be given player power at our discretion and our choice for a long time now. But that's usually accompanied to the idea of saying, like, let us grind the game out. Let us play the game and achieve our power again. You know, whether it be cosmetic tier sets or you know, gear that nobody else can acquire. I think there's a semblance of most individuals that play this game in some regard, whether it be from transmogs to mounts to achievements to pets to PvP to Mythic Plus IO score. Everybody wants to feel that satisfaction of their character being rewarded or recognized in some way.
I think you'd still have that.
Well, the reason I say it would be less is, here's an example. This is just from my personal point of view as someone who is relative touching to most areas of the game. If I'm a competitive raider within the guild Dinosaur Cowboys, and I am associated to be playing balance this tier, I now have to objectively say to, you know, officers, you as a guild leader, me as a player, hey, my heart and desires are to do Mythic Plus. Is it okay that I am now going to do X amount damage less, or potentially not have this one mechanic that most all other balanced druids will have in raid, you know, or they've determined to be systematically better, their raid bots have spewed out Covenant X is better than Covenant Y damage-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Is this an acceptable thing as an individual that I now want to say from a personal desire, I really like the game because I can play a druid. Well, I really want to play a Nightfade druid now because of Mythic Plus. Well, that might not perform so well. Is this an acceptable outcome for me to then hurt the guild or hurt my raid performance because I'm now associated with this only?
At our level, sorry, I thought you were done.
Go for it. No,
I was just going to say, at our level, I would not hinder you on your choice unless something dramatic were to happen. I don't think it would affect us. And I think we're a relatively competitive guild. I mean, we raid a low amount of hours, and we get cutting edge fairly early. So I think we're probably well above the average of most raiders in the game. If we were in a limit type environment where we're pushing for world first, I could see your scenario causing conflicts. But I think the people engaging in that level of content understand that, which is why they make so many different characters and are prepared for so many different scenarios that they might encounter.
Right, but from a personal thing, of at least from me as a player, this again is going to be the first time that I can't prioritize myself as an individual. Maybe I'm an outlier to the scenario, but I truly feel that there's going to be a lot of people out there that maybe they really don't want to play fire, or maybe they really don't want to play this specific spec. And then maybe it goes further down the line where they don't want to play this Covenant, but they feel it might be best. I feel like there's a little bit too much weight or pressure on the individuals from a numbers perspective, and how the secondaries function. Even the secondaries now are in huge question of Venthyr Door. Is the potion going to be really broken?
Oh, I think they're almost more important. Yeah.
I agree with this, and that's why I'm saying like these abilities. If we had a system of like an unlock, maybe an emissary unlock that we acquired over the course of the expansion, where we chose our first power covenants, but then eventually we could lead down the roads to all other unlocks. I feel like that might be a good balance to then say we don't want immediate powers. We don't want to just flick the switch and whenever we want we can change anything, but allow us to then progress powers so that we don't feel as limited to the content that we desire to do.
Yeah.
I have a question specifically for Tiny. Do you think that most people will have chosen do you think that like Icy Veins or whatever research people can do as to which is the best covenant for raiding and for Mythic Plus, do you think people will have chosen that covenant before the raid comes out? And that will remain to be the best covenant?
I think there's going to be
You think the Simcraft will be good enough?
I think there's going to be a large enough amount of hive minds out there. People are already doing this who are at the most competitive edge of their school, class, and specific class, or spec and specific class. Blood, Death Knight, Unholy, Frost, whatever you want to break it down. You have those people that will take a look at what the numbers are, and aesthetically, they'll break down and say like, okay, from the context of where these would be good, X, Y, and Z will always perform best in this area of the game.
I feel like the APLs usually aren't good enough before the raid comes out.
It's also very much up in the air, too. It's a tentative balance system where you can look at Focus Iris at the start of the expansion. It came out, or even Echoing Void from a corruption standpoint. It came out of the gate really powerful, and it changed the whole dynamic of the raiding scene. And then that received such a gargantuan rollback on live that all of the individuals who maybe had bought Echoing Void, seeing how powerful it was, spent real gold or maybe real money acquiring this power for their characters. Maybe they look at the Race to World First as a raider and they say, oh man, this is doing exceptionally well. I really should have chosen this one. I think that there's... Go for it.
I think Echoing Void's a really simple example because any novice programmer could chuck that into an APL. I feel like that the covenants are way too complicated. I will be really amazed if the Simcraft community figures out which ones are the best and they're actually right. I would bet money that they won't get it, and that people will just have to choose whatever. And as a result of that, this does two things to all of Tiny's points. Tiny's been saying, well, you're either going to do the research ahead of time and pick the right one, or you're just going to be wrong. But what I think is crucial to Nat and my claim is that nobody's going to know what the best one is.
I think they'll mostly know. There's enough testing going on, and there's enough
be going on.
Like,
for months.
Most people will have a pretty clear idea of what's best for what. Like, I mean, to me, again, just like what frightens me is I like to play all my specs. And like, if I have to switch, if I initially pick arms as my main spec, and then I want to switch to Fury, and that feels bad because of my Covenant, like that's gonna really suck. Like that's just where my head's at with it. Like I just don't want to be feeling bad about my Covenant if I want to play all my specs.
And I think that can be broken down, like I said, in a finer degree between most all players. Again, you choose your spec at the load screen, which Blizzard's done a phenomenal job setting up your new character creations. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's amazing. You load in and you get this really emblazoned effects where your abilities go off and you get to see this cool stuff. And you're like, that looks the spec for me. I want to play a warrior, plate, armor, big shield, big sword, whatever it might be. And you roll into it. The prickly thorns within all of this now is I do think people are going to be able to take a look at those numbers. I do think the APLs are going to be generated. Whether or not they're 100% accurate, I think they're going to have a good enough viewpoint of just numbers condensing and say, like, this is objectively best for you as a tank and objectively best for you as a DPS. And then you have to make a conscious decision as a player where do I then say, I really just want to be a part of the fairies. That's my thing. I'm going to be a Death Knight fairy, and I want to have that gear and that transmog and that look. And then you're going to join a raiding environment or a raiding scene, and you're going to perform worse. And you as a player are going to recognize that you chose something that gave you less power. Yeah, and there's nothing you can do.
So yeah. I have a question, because we speak about worse and better in kind of general terms for me at the moment. What percentage scale is the tipping point for you? Is it 1% difference? Is it 5% difference? 20?
That's a hard thing to say, but from if I were to break that down into a casual argument, I would say maybe within sub 5 is balanceable, and that's okay. But more than 5 is where the thin line kind of.
I see them being perfectly capable, and maybe this is me over giving Blizzard too much credit, but I think they can balance the damage side of these Covenant abilities and the damage potential that they present. I don't think they can balance the utility side. I don't know how they would do that.
The really dangerous thing is also the utility side of it, but also compounding with legendaries. One Covenant may work very, very powerfully with this design of this one specific legendary.
Sure.
Even right now, as a great example, playing around as a Resto Druid and taking Luigi's advice to try all the different schools, there's a setup right now that if I do Night Fae, Convoke the Spirits, it calls upon my current form and does a bunch of abilities as a Druid. If I run the Heart of the Wild Legendary, and every time I shift into Balance form as a Feral Druid, I'm doing more damage than Balance Affinity True Balance Druids. So me as a Feral Druid now am doing all my cat damage, and I'm doing Balance form damage. And this Legendary
with Heart of the Wild, though, right?
Correct, right. But it's with this specific Legendary and this specific Covenant.
But now, that's a very specific setup in a small window of time. I think that's cool. I like that level of
I agree that's
creativity.
From the damage numbers and balancing of it, this is where it's going to go. This is now a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. When is this one ability going to be way too much? Then do they swing the hammer towards the Covenant? Do they swing the hammer towards the Legendary, the class, the spec? And there's too many folding tables that Blizzard's layering on this. I am a player who is going to try and do my best to optimize the fun out of the game. Versus just saying, this is really cool. It's a dangerous road to allow me to then say, you're gonna be giving all your cards to them and say, I trust you to balance this. When me as a player, having been burned for 4 expansions for air quote balance, or that knee-jerk reaction, I don't want to give Blizzard too much faith in that world. The idea of this is wonderful. The execution is the thing that's going to be that very, very fine line that Blizzard's not known for being delicate with.
Right.
I don't think it will be balanced, but I think, to harken back to something you said just a second ago, being burned about picking the wrong choice and feeling bad because of it. Like, do you feel bad having chosen a druid? Because I think druid, what spec of druid is viable to anything right now? I think resto is good for Mythic Plus, but not the best, right? So like,
I mean, I
do
would.
you regularly feel bad having made that choice?
I don't, because there's individuals out there right now within the PvP scene, the Mythic Plus scene, the rating scene. They're all performing at the highest caliber of all of their specs. I think most specs in the game can be played and be relatively attuned to most all content. Now, obviously, the 1% content we have to exclude. But even right now, the best tank Mythic Plus wise in the world is Prop Warriors and a single Guardian Druid. Some of the best healers in the world, Holy Paladins, and then, Resto Druids. Like, there's Feral Druids out there that are, almost reaching 6K. Now, to emphasize your point, balance. There's one balance Druid in the world that's 5K. One. That's spec right now because of the corruption and the scaling. It doesn't perform well. Right. Now, again, if I was playing balance for raid and this is all I was allowed to play and this is what I wanted to do, how do I now feel that, like, if I want to just play Feral because it's better in keys or maybe PvP, or maybe it turns out better in raid, 3 months down the line, I'm locked into this covenant and this choice. Maybe then at that point as a player, I'm going to say, like, this feels really bad now. Because I chose this to play a balanced Venthyr.
I don't think that the Covenant choice will be nearly as impactful as spec choice. So you're saying that that one of the top tanks is a bear, one of the top healers is a resto, but we can both agree that Druid isn't the best at that, despite the fact that someone is doing very well.
It's argued, but I can agree with from a tank perspective, not a healer. But yeah, that's semantics.
But I think that the Covenants, while some of them are pretty impressive, I think that it won't be as bad as what you're saying with balance. But I think it will still be very much the case that a good player will be able to perform despite whatever Covenant they chose.
If they can get that balancing down, great.
I think
the big thing is that Covenants just don't seem like they're that massive of a change to most of the classes that I've seen.
It's massive for Warrior. I can tell you that right now.
It's very different. Yeah.
Because Venthyr Condemn is very, very, very heavy single target focused.
Sure, but they can change that with just a couple number switches.
But that's a
single target ability. It's
right.
The number
always
switches
perform best in
it's
one
a
area.
single. Yeah, it's a very heavily single target focus.
Right.
All three other Covenants are all AoE abilities. Right, so it comes back to. I
thought they got a banner. Don't they have a support ability?
What?
Auto attack thing.
No, it's is it Necro that has the banner? I think it's Necro. Necro has
attack speed, right?
Yeah, it gives you attack speed and like glory stacks or whatever it is. But the other two are AoE abilities. But like the banner is like more utility focused, I guess. It's like what a tank would probably do or something like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, like. They're so different, right? Like they're so different. Like two of them are AoE abilities, one's the banner, and one's like heavily single target. Like, I mean, how am I supposed to, like, I have to, if I'm gonna do Mythic Plus, like I can't choose the single target ability.
Well,
like
sure.
You know what I mean? Like it just feels bad. Like if you want to do multiple content, if you want to switch multiple specs, it just feels bad because you're not going to be, you're just going to have a shitty ability.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate on that a little bit. So what do you say to the person who is a warrior and says, I really like the idea of being supporty. I like this banner ability. I like the idea that I can be called upon to drop my banner at the specific moment in a raid encounter or in a dungeon and give everyone in the group a boost to their own damage and potential. And that is how I like to play. But if I'm forced to freely swap and we're on a tight execute fight or something, or there's burst windows for specific ads and people want me to go single target, I now am being told not to do that. Whereas if I were locked into that choice, it'd be much harder for someone to say, hey, you have to switch. Like you'd have to have someone else prepared.
Sure, but I think that's where choice in the different type of players come into play, right? So like if you're pushing high-end content, like the ability to switch based on the content you're doing is huge because you have to, min max in certain scenarios, like depending upon the content you're doing, right?
Mhm.
So like that's a great feature. If you're like, a casual player doing 15s or whatever, like, who cares? Who
They
cares
do.
what you play?
No, that's kind of the backbone of that argument is that sort of thing trickles down.
It does trickle
The
down.
meta
For
trickles
sure.
down, and
I mean,
it
absolutely it
kills
does.
all of the other choices. So
Right.
that
Well,
was the
now,
whole thing with why bother even developing these other
right.
abilities? Just make one.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. But I mean, now you're talking about not getting invited at all, as opposed to being able to switch and do it,
Well, I guess
right?
that's my point.
But you don't. You don't. We
Exactly,
see
that
that with
doesn't happen.
classes. We see that in real life happening today with classes. You still get invited.
Yeah, and no, that's not
Less. No.
that's not
So
true.
wait. Less, but you still do.
Yeah, and then again,
You're a 29, 30 arms warrior, whatever, 29 key pushing arms warrior. Like you're
uh,
still getting invited.
I actually barely get invited as arms.
But you
Barely.
do.
But
But
you
you do.
do.
Well,
But
I
you
mean,
do.
I do
as a
because I
caveat
have
to this,
established a reputation, like
yeah,
as a player. Like
he'll
I
turn down keys because he doesn't want to pay.
Show me the frost mage who's pushing high mythic plus keys. Who gets invited to anything?
you don't.
Right.
They see you're a mage, you get
They see
invited. They
that
see
you're
you're
not choosing the thing that you can easily switch to. Therefore, you must be a poor player. So you might as well not develop these other abilities.
I mean,
Right,
but I will say from a player that like we've done keys, I'm sure, where we've played with somebody who is a subtlety rogue or a frost mage, and it's very clear their power difference, but it's not unplayable in the context of the game. It's you are doing this as a recognizable choice. Now, if they can get the systems in place where they're balanced at a relative degree that it doesn't feel detrimental to unlock or like you're being punished. I think that's the fine definitive word for me and maybe Luigi. I don't want to speak for him directly, but like that feel of it where like we recognize as a player in our class that these are better options.
Yeah.
Allow me to work to get these so that I can change them or be interchangeable because I really want to play whatever spec of class or have you with these covenants that would be better in this area of the game. Now, if they get it balanced and locked in, it's great, but I also don't think that a majority of the community, other than like probably extreme cultural divides with even in most keys, like you could start the key as a 15 and you wouldn't be frost. There would probably be some grievances or surprise, but I don't often think if you performed well with your character and still did well in the key, that it would be an issue. Like, and this is me pugging keys and just doing normal group stuff where people says, I'm sorry I'm playing this class. I'm like, you don't have to feel bad about it. That's a bad community perception, and you can't fix that. You can't fix that community perception. So trying to balance around it is impossible. But as a player, you're still going to feel, at least I would think most people would feel bad if their choice felt diminished or restricted or pulled back from. If I'm wanting to play, an assassination rogue, I now have to look at if I ever change specs because maybe raiding or PvP. Assassination is great in PvP, but maybe not great in balanced and raid or something. I have to play with this power system or this choice that I recognized I don't necessarily want to have. You're kind of just married to it. And it becomes a measure of tolerance, not enjoyment. With systems that they've given it to us. These power systems should make us feel powerful and rewarded. And I feel like it might go down a thin road where suddenly we're realizing 3 months into the expansion, I might have made a bad choice. And what do you do at that point? And that's all at the hands of their balancing. If they get it right every time perfectly for the whole expansion, great.
Which they never do.
Correct.
No,
Yeah,
I don't think they will.
I don't think they will either. And I think we're all sort of saying the same thing, but coming to different
for sure.
conclusions.
For sure.
And I think for me, I get excited that there's going to be multiple different shamans and that my shaman, in the same way I get excited that there's multiple different classes. I don't curse the day that I chose shaman because it's not very good at Mythic Plus. I look at all the different classes and say, oh, look at what this class can do. Look at how neat is that? How fun is the game? How interesting is the game? And in the same way with covenants and being locked into it, I relish the idea of picking a covenant, seeing what other people have picked, and seeing where they succeed and fail in the same way that I can look at classes. And talking about freely switching, if it was truly that important to me, and I absolutely needed to push Mythic Plus, well, I can level a druid. It doesn't take that long. Or I guess it's paladin now. Excuse me. It was Resto Druid was the best. Now it's paladin, right? Or monk now. I don't know.
More or less, all kind of equivalent. Like
more or less anything but shadow.
I mean, yeah. Even in some extreme outliers, there are some. But yeah, I agree with you in that regard. So.
Yeah. Well, we're just about over an hour, so there were two things left that I kind of wanted to touch on, and then we can wrap up. But it's one's kind of in the vein of what we are talking about now, and then the other one is one we kind of brought up a little bit earlier. But so I kind of want to follow up with the scenario I presented before of the warrior who wants to play the more support type role, where they've picked their banner ability, they like that identity, they like providing that for their group. Do you think that support level players or support abilities in general should be considered as kind of a play style or endgame play style? Because I think Blizzard's gone back and forth on this. They got rid of it a while ago, and now it seems like they're bringing it back.
I'll start at least for this one, because I'll make a pretty concise point and not go super long like I normally do. Blizzard has been on record for stating multiple times that the player basis does not want to be a supportive player, and I think that's in fact 100% wrong. I think there's a majority of people out there that like support classes, either bards, red mages, utility-based druids, shamans with totems and twisting, and all these essences that were a part of the vanilla era of classes where we had utility powers. We had nicheness to us that was like, maybe I'm not the best at this, but heck, man, I can do this really well and it feels good. That utility where you make someone else stronger, make a healer cost no mana with Innervate, or whatever it might be, those were really great. I really think that as players, a majority and a large majority of players want utility abilities to make their friends more powerful. Your wife, your husband, your sister, your brother, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your whatever that you're playing with. You want to make them feel better and they want to make you feel better. It's just the caveat of the game of working in a team environment and a mass multiplayer online. I think Blizzard's dying on a sword by saying that players don't want to do this. And they've been on record for saying this.
Well, my argument would be if you can freely swap your Covenant choices and that banner ability isn't the best, but that's what you like to play and your play style, you are more or less killing that play style, because the community is telling this person that even though you like to play this way, it is not the best, and therefore you should not be playing it.
But that word specifically, the best, is where where it dies and lives at. Now, the best players in the game are not going to do it, but the normal players of the game will still enjoy doing that. It's all about balance. The majority of a lot of these arguments is how you feel as a player. And I think most all players are not going to feel better knowing that they chose something that in utility sounds great, but in performance is poor. I think most players are going to recognize it's really cool when I throw down this war banner and all my allies do 1% more damage. But in numbers and aesthetics and gameplay, you're going to realize, well, I can just do an ability that makes me do 200% more damage. Now, these are obviously embellished numbers, but you as a player, I think most all players will recognize there are going to be people who take something from just a cosmetic standpoint and just an aesthetic standpoint, but not from a play performance. You playing a tank, maybe that's really great as a tank, and that's what your play style is, great. But balancing wise, you're going to realize I'd rather have this defense ability that makes me live longer. I think that best word is the thing that needs to be tied into this. It's players' mindsets of how they want to perform better. So I think
it's going to depend on the content.
Yeah.
Right? It depends on the content that Blizzard has created. For instance, in Mythic Plus, it depends. Maybe that banner ability is extremely good in a particular dungeon, or because of certain mechanics. Mm-hmm. Those types of things. It's not always about how much DPS can you do. In dungeons, the higher you go, it's about can you live.
Creative mechanics.
Can you live without damage? So
this thing, that thing.
So the solving of those problems is if you do have the ability to switch, like I said before, different things are good in different scenarios. You know what I'm saying? Like I might use like I see that's the thing. There isn't going to be one that's best always. If Blizzard, if there
Right.
was something like that, like Blizzard would have horrible, um, what do you call it? Balancing, right? If one was just better in all scenarios. And to me, like that's what I like. I like, you know, if I'm doing Mythic Plus, like this dungeon, like I want to go Condemn because like it's all single target focus. In this dungeon, like we need one person to sacrifice damage and use the banner because like the banner is really good for like this encounter or whatever. And that's fun. Like that's fun to think of. And I mean, ultimately, you're right. Like in the end, like each dungeon's gonna have their best setup, right? Like everyone's gonna should be those things if they want to perform optimally. But having that choice is fun.
Well, I think what's going to be cool about this expansion is for that choice. I want to do single target. I want to be the best at this right now. I want to be the best at this right now. You're going to be able to switch your soulbinds. You're going to be able to switch your conduits. You're going to be able to switch your legendaries. These are all things that you're going to be able to tune for everything that you're doing. But the one thing that you won't be able to unless they change it is the covenants, right? So in the same way, what the covenants are doing is they're adding on to that sort of class. That's why I started this by saying they're basically subclasses, because in design, in function, they sort of are. You are locked into your covenant class combination, but you'll still be able to change all these other things.
Right.
And I think from most aspects, you know, maybe Luigi will agree with me on this, but like if they get it 100% right, we're thumbs up for it. But I think we as players kind of we understand how the track record has been for balance, and our natural fear and reserves for how they're going to balance these things are going to make us as players feel less rewarded for our choice of this class, this design that we are going to lock into for the next 2-something years. That's a very, very thin line for us to just take at a face value and say, like, I remember when you said you were never going to nerf those legendaries, where everybody would only get one. You know, I'm definitely not going to feel completely left out of power. Now, obviously, we get to choose our legendaries, and, you know, in the perfect bubble and sphere, all the covenants will work relative number-wise, where there's going to be a best choice, but it's never going to be to the extremes where we have to, like, all right, I got to make another warrior, you know. Maybe in the most number one highest echelon, because that exists now. We can take the concept of saying races. Every race in the game performs systematically better for numbers and damage and defensive, whatever. You want to break it down from healer to DPS to tank. And people at the highest end of the game will do that. They'll pay the money to race change. But a large swath of the population is not going to be like, I can't roll a Vulpera, man. Just can't do it. Like, even me, I love High Mountain. People have messaged me and be like, why didn't you roll change to Feral for Tauren because of the extra strike through? And I'm like, because I fucking want to be a moose. I like being a moose, you know? And me as a player that plays at the high end, that's okay. Now, if the Covenants come out and they're that way and they're, you know, relative balance numbers that I don't feel, damn, dude, look at Night Elf Shadow Meld. Uh-oh. You know, that exists right now. You look at how 3 hunters exist in the MDI. That's not live keys. Nobody's doing that except the tournament realm. But again, these covenants being the way they are, both utility and whatever, we have that shadow mode that exists inside of the Night Fae. Uh-oh. Now suddenly we get access to this as a choice. You know, there's these very thin roads that lead down that is going to be bad because of just how the design is. If they get it right, it won't matter. But if they get it way wrong, you better be a Blood Elf for that Dispel. You better be a Blood Elf because of that Silence. You better be a Night Elf for that Shadow Meld. And that is going to, like, I'll put one word out there, and I think a majority of the player bases will understand this, and that's Worgen. Nobody plays a Worgen unless you really want to be a Worgen. There's no Alliance player that's like...
You're talking about strictly the high Mythic Plus community.
I'm saying in general. Like, there's a lot of people out there that aesthetically don't want to play that. And they understand what Shadow Meld or even just Coltiran Punch. Nobody's just like, I want to run slightly faster for 1 second versus the cool idea of like Coltiran's having a knockback and a punch or Shadow Meld or, you know, whatever it might be. You know, that world exists right now in a large portion of the players, you know, where they can recognize that's more power maybe I need to be that. But again, at that high end percentage, it exists. But in a normalcy.
I actually think race is an example of something that comes into Nat and Mai's point, really, because or at least for the non-high mythic community, there's a sort of disparity here between
I'm saying
pushing high mythic plus and not,
yeah.
because I think the vast majority of everyone who isn't pushing high mythic plus or world first race or PvP doesn't really give a shit about race at all, because one, it's something that you're locked into. There isn't an expectation that, like, why aren't you changing to the best race? Like, why aren't you paying $15 to change to the best race? Because nobody cares in anything but the Top Mythic Plus community.
I know the Top Mythic Plus community doesn't care about race at all, because all the race abilities and everything are balanced within like less than 1% of each other. Like,
exactly. That was my point.
Irrelevant. It's irrelevant. So I mean, Covenants will not be like that. There's no way they would be balanced that tightly.
Oh, no, I don't think so. No, I guess my point was, it sounded like Tiny was saying that people do care what race you play.
No. That's what I'm saying. It only matters in like the extreme high ends or the tournament realm. Right. That's what I'm saying. But again, we're now giving these abilities within the Covenants that are going just beyond number tuning. You know, if the numbers are right and everybody's doing relative 1% variance, but suddenly you're a Night Elf versus a High Mountain, you know, in that world of Covenant choice, we now have these things, these utility abilities. They're not all one and the same, sadly. It's not just a damage thing. It's also utility. And these utilities are pretty massive. How they balance these, you know, Venthyr, Door of Shadows, Night Fae, you have your Soul Shape, you know, the Necrolord Fleshcraft. These are radically different abilities in context and in balancing design. This is a very thin rope to walk. So suddenly when you're given that option or opportunity in that realm of content, how does that play out now? Like, that's my fear. You know, if the damage is good,
it plays out the same way that classes play out, as long as they're locked in place. If they're not locked in place, then everyone has to be the good one.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I that's at least from me, maybe as a context.
Everyone doesn't have to be the good one, though. That's where I think you get it wrong a little bit. I mean, that there could be pressure to be the good one in certain scenarios, but like, I mean, I don't think it's going to be as bad as you would think it would be.
It's fully based on how easy it is to switch. If by fully locking it in, it's just no. You can't be the best one unless you happen to reroll completely, and that expectation can't be there. If they do something like it's extremely expensive to switch, then you get to a sort of weird gray area.
Yeah, but it's really bad because it's like Azerite respecking. Why do you think so many people don't want to play tank or a healer? Is just, I don't want to reforge my Azerite every day.
Sure.
You know, like that balance of power is, like I said, this is a thin line where all of these come down to simple number tuning, but also there's a larger scope of utility tuning that needs to go into place too. And you're going to be, maybe it's a pessimistic way of looking at it, but you're at a lose-lose situation for locking it in some context, whether it be PvE, or PvE, Mythic Plus, rating, PvP, BGs, or, you know, casual side of the game, whatever it might be. There's a large slice of pie where suddenly you'll recognize yourself as a player that you're going to feel some semblance of lacking, you know, whatever your character might be or whatever your choice might be. Well, I agree that it's nice that there is this choice of power to it, and maybe if they had the damage numbers right, the damage would be the fine side of it. I'm more concerned to the utility side of it.
Yeah,
because
I agree
feel
with
like
that.
there's going to be, you know, in the extreme cases, you're going to have to kill Jaden all over again, where everybody's got to be known. Or Jaina, everyone's going to go troll for Voodoo Shuffle. That's the extreme 1% side,
right?
Right.
Unless they re-roll, which you can't realistically.
Right, and again, that's an extreme side of it where I don't think that's going to be most all normal people. But the other side of it is going to be that choice of saying, you know, even if you just broke down the total populations of what druids look like, and you compare Worgen to Night Elf as an alliance, that's a really radical race difference. Not even damage numbers, but just from utility of Shadow Meld. You're going to see maybe, 7% Worgen, maybe at the highest 15 to an 85 margin of Night Elf. Maybe that has a little bit of cosmetic in there, but I think a majority of that is just pure and simple that Shadow Meld as a ability is just way too good to pass up, and most players recognize this.
I mean, even in Classic, I'm pretty sure Night Elves were like 40% of the Alliance or 50%. So I think there's a big cosmetic element there. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
they're more powerful. So yeah.
sure. I think that there's that side of it. But again, in the extremes of it, when you're given that opportunity, say if we did it now, if I could be any druid race in the game, I think most people at a high end would choose the more optimal selection. Now do I think that is going to be the necessity? No. And I think that might be maybe more limited to the top end of individuals. But I think a large populace of players are going to recognize power gaps. They're going to feel their character feel worse in PvP or arenas and wonder why they can't do something involved with it. Now, I also think, truthfully, from my end of the game, what I want is to have all power available to me through grinding or unlocking or whatever it'll be. But I also am terrified of the situation because it's going to be Legion gear sets all over again. Oh man, all right, I got to wear this legendary with this thing for this specific fight. So this one I need to be bent here. Like, this might be helping your argument, and I do agree with it. But I still want as a player to have that opportunity and choice because maybe this functions better, or maybe someone develops a new route or a new strat that involves another covenant.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to go into it. I mean, I think even the average player will realize, like, if they're doing different types of content, that their covenant choice would feel bad if they, from switching the one to another. I think they would notice that, and that would, be a reason that it should be swappable in that regard.
Well, I think if they were swappable, the community would then force that swap in those specific routes and different situations.
That depends on balancing, but yes, I agree.
I actually think with race too, if it were free to switch race, there would be a higher community expectation.
I agree
that everyone's playing the right race. And
I do agree with that.
They would probably be like, well, switch race for this raid and then switch back when you're done.
I don't think so from a damage perspective because it's so marginal.
Utility,
but from a utility perspective,
of course, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it might be marginal enough.
And that's why I'm saying, like, the damage side of this, the numbers are irrelevant. It's beta. 1 million damage today, 1 damage tomorrow.
Exactly.
It's the covenants as a whole where you're now locked into these extra abilities that are, quote unquote, your class. You're going to feel bad one way or another, in my opinion. There's no winning on that.
Well, that brings me back to my original point, where if you can switch them, then Blizzard has to assume that people will enter these encounters with the right choice. Mm-hmm. Where if they cannot switch them, Blizzard can now not balance their fight around everyone having a 1 minute on-demand absorb shield. They just can't do it because not everybody will have it. Will it trivialize the race to world phase?
But these raid fights already exist. Do you even look at like N'Zoth? The design of a raid fight having mass immunities again is a terrible raid design. But it's going to exist in all levels of content.
I think you underestimate to the level they can take it when they can assume that every person will have
I don't think they can,
abilities.
Because they still balance to the normal environment.
They could design a fight that requires 20 teleports. Everyone has.
I don't think they would ever do. Like, I don't think they would do that in the context.
I think they would design a fight like that. I think one fight like this is the everyone's a Venthyr fight.
It would trivialize the race to world first would be such a big joke if everybody could switch to these things. Because they're going to figure out the best way to accomplish these fights, and it's going to be by switching around these covenant abilities.
That live fight doesn't come to us as players. We're not that at the level. Like, that would be a spectacle to watch, obviously, but that's the same as a tournament realm.
Well,
where you watch
the race to world first doesn't.
Listen, if we switch freely, we have to switch to the best specs. Because we'll learn their strat, and we will all have to do the 20 Venthyr strat. Like that will trickle down.
Yeah,
I agree in some things, but not readily, because like them doing race to world first of Jaina was all trolls, or whatever it might be, or even the kills of Kil'jaeden. Not everybody race changed to Goblin,
Yeah, but that's not free. That costs $15. There's no expectation for the rest.
But again, that's the expectation of the individuals doing this content would be that. Again, I don't think that will occur. But it's what's going to end up being in existence now is that there's going to be situations where I don't think they're going to balance it around sub-covenants or anything of that extreme, I think, like I said, in a large context of it, it's just going to be there. It's just going to exist as a power gap. The choice that you made a Worgen druid versus a night elf, or you even talk in the context of like troll mage versus orc mage, whatever it might be. Orcs are clearly better in PvP. Some warriors only play orcs because of PvP. Some play troll warriors now because of haste, or maybe blood elf, or maybe whatever it might be in the rotational damage margins. But that orc warrior who's going to step into PvE content doesn't do as much damage as, say, the counterpoint. Those say just troll, for an example. There's areas of the game that are going to be worse and better because of this, and now they're defining it even more as a player, because while I don't think that they're going to balance raid content around this, I do think there's going to be massive potholes that are going to exist in Mythic Plus, PvP, arenas, all of those areas of the game, because they tend to look at raiding environments and say, here's our raid fight, and we're designing the encounter around you having multiple mages. Or mages maybe trivialize this, so you're going to heavily prioritize mages. And so that world exists. But then you're going to be left in a situation where you're like, Destruction Warlocks are good, I guess. And then you look at PvP, and you're just like, holy, how has that been okay for 2 years? And most people recognize this because they can look at, the balancing and developing they've done for corruption or classes based on competitive and arena and raiding. Mythic Plus is kind of left out of that in the balancing tune. They see 3 hunters exist out there. They're not like, oh, got a nerf BM. That hasn't happened ever. Or outlaw rogues or unholy Death Knight even. Unholy Death Knight has been crazy, where you watch him do 1 million damage during season 2, and people were not like, oh, that class is useless now. It's still really good in arena, in PvP. Those DPS numbers don't exist. But like in the context of those power gaps, it's going to be this way where individuals are going to see something and want to have it and know that they can't. And I think that's where it is in certain realms of the game, whether it be PvP or arena or raiding.
I think if there's one takeaway from what I'm trying to claim, is that that's already the way the game is, and people like the game. And so now they're just making 48 classes instead of 12. That unbalance, that already exists. People can complain about it. People complain about everything, whatever. But people still like and play the game. So it's going to continue being that way. Just now you are a Covenant class, not just a class.
For sure. But I think the counter argument there is that, we can see based on just having the classes that we have now and the specs that we have now that Blizzard already has a very difficult time balancing those across different types of content.
And they're adding another layer.
Yeah, and now you're adding another layer on top of that. So it makes it even more complicated. So, like, how are they going to get that right on top of it already being, like, so difficult?
They're not. There's going to be, instead of being 3 terrible classes, there's going to be 24 out of the 48. Who knows? It's going to be, it's just going to happen. And if you are one of those terrible classes, you either content yourself being the best at your role or re-roll, which is the way the game works now. And people like the way the game works now.
I don't think people like it. I think they just tolerate it. Because it costs money to change that power.
I think that's a pretty weak claim for something that people spend their spare time doing.
I agree.
They tolerate their favorite pastime? Come on now.
I mean, I think there's a level of addiction to it. I mean, you want to just say, like, in a regard where I for myself as a player, I'm just like, man, there's some days that it's really not fun to log in or play the game because of the race I've chosen or the class I've chosen or whatever it might be, and I'm okay with that in some aspects, but in other days, it definitely doesn't feel good to be like, I could just play a mage. I could just make a mage right now and get invited to keys, It feels bad as, like, an example for, like, maybe Luigi or even myself in a PvP environment or in a Mythic Plus environment. Somebody's like, hey, dude, you want to come tank a key? I really don't want to tank right now, dude. I'm not in the right mood. And people are like, okay, bye.
Shadowlands is going to have no Azerite grind, no corruption grind. It's going to take about 12 hours to go 1 to 60. Make that mage, dude.
I mean, I'm super excited for the idea of Shadowlands, but I'm not super excited for the idea of being locked into a wall that says you are now a feral druid Venthyr. That, to me, does not sound like a fun aspect of a gameplay for me.
Yep.
Maybe some people fantasize about that, where they don't want to be a utility fire mage. Or maybe they really do want to be a utility fire mage, and they're okay with giving up power, and they're okay with giving up their choice. But for me as a player, like I would imagine, maybe I'm being a bit of hubris, but I imagine that most players are intelligent enough to understand where where they put their selection. And I think there's going to be a large majority of the people that are going to hit 60 and be like, I don't know what to do. And they're going to just kind of put their hands in the air because like every choice will feel like the wrong one in some context. There's never a situation where like if this was just cosmetic or just utility damage numbers, that would be fine. Because like, you know, when I looked at all these when they released it on the screen and I had goosebumps at BlizzCon, the first thing I saw were like the fairies and everything. I'm like, yes, that's me, dude. I want to be a Yaya, man. I want to be the weeaboo. I want fairies and colorful flowers, man. Boom, that's me. But then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, but if you do that, you don't get the ability that's really broken right now. Or maybe, hey, if you really enjoy this content, you don't get to do that. And I'm gonna be like, but I really want to. I want to play with the flowers, man. Like that's what I want. Why can't I have that?
Well,
You know?
we're at like an hour and a half now, and I think we've at least talked this point to death in a circle over and over again. So the last thing I kind of wanted to end on was like a fun moment where we all kind of shared our idea for how we would best see covenant swapping implemented.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start since I sort of brought it up anyway in the initial argument. But my thought process was that you pick your initial covenant, and that is, you'll be locked with your soul, with choosing between the three different soul binds for the rest of the expansion, right? With regards to the covenant you chose, but since all the covenants have the same goal, you can then go to another covenant as a representative for the one that you chose, and do some sort of questing or whatever to slowly unlock the ability to swap just the major covenant abilities, freely. And I think it makes a little sense lore wise, and well, I guess not lore wise. I don't really know the lore, so
don't worry about lore.
But yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think it could make sense. Like it's a middle ground where you're locked in soul binds, but you have the ability to switch covenants like over time. Like it shouldn't be like an easy thing. Like it should take time. I don't think it should be something that you can just do within like a couple weeks or whatever.
Sure.
But I think eventually slowly unlock like all the covenants. I think that would be a good area.
So just so I understood, you think you should be able to pick one initially, and then there should be some type of progression grade where you work on other covenants and then eventually unlock their abilities, which you can then, by swap freely, I assume you're meaning like a talent, where you're in a rested area, you swip and swap which one you want.
Yeah, talent or go into some area or whatever it is, like some
would
way.
Would you be able to swap around freely all the ones you had access to? So could I have the Venthyr Blink with the Necrolord banner or whatever it is?
No, I wouldn't say that. Like I would think you would have to be like, you get both abilities for that for whatever covenant you choose, right? So you'd have if you have the blink, you have the Venthyr ability and so forth.
So
and so on.
You would pick which one you wanted to level towards next. So it'd be kind of like another progression system. Once you've finished and picked your initial one, now you've got 3 to pick from that you're working towards next.
Exactly. And you could just do them over time, like pick one that you feel like you want to do. Like if I like to do raid and mythic plus, like I might choose the raid one first and the mythic plus one second. But like the covenant you choose at the beginning, that's where you're locked, like with the story, the aesthetics, and the soul bonds.
Okay. Actually, if I can just add something to his. If we're each talking about our
each can share your own idea.
I would say exactly what Luigi said, except what I would probably do is I would time gate each of the 4 progressions. That way, there can't be a player expectation for like. So, for example, if I was doing Mythic Plus and I had finished Venthyr, but I was only 1 week into Kyrian, and then my friend's like, why aren't you max Kyrian? And if it's not time gated, I would just be like, oh well, I didn't spend enough time on it. If it is time gated, I would just say, well, I will be in 3 weeks, right? So I would probably just do exactly what you said, but I would time gate it.
Okay,
that's fair.
Tiny, did you have an idea?
Yeah, so at least from my side of it, while I kind of agree in some context of what Luigi's saying, but I think in the opposite regard, I think it's the utility side of things that's more dangerous and more problematic right now than the damage numbers. I would be fine with locking in with like Event Theory and having the damage portion of Event Theory. That's interesting. The thing that I would want to have, and I agree with the time gating as well in the context of it, a slow expansion of powers. You can call it, emissary to the Venthyr, or steward, or whatever you want to phrase it lore wise or context wise. But I think it would be really interesting is over the course of the expansion, maybe months, whatever it might be, we unlock the accessibility of the other utility side of it. I think the damage side of it is fine. The numbers can always be tuned up or down, and I think most players are okay within a smaller margin of it.
Yeah.
It's more the utility side of it that I think is really detrimental, because some are really, really powerful, and you're going to feel slighted for not having it in one realm of the game, or maybe even one fight to the next. Whether or not this balancing team ever looks at specificity of it, like classes or specs, we don't know entirely, but we have seen the results of it. You look at Zool, suddenly Subtlety Rogue's not so good for 2 years. And that's kind of one of those things where the damage side of the game can be always at a hit or miss, and that's never in our hands. The only thing that I could say, and I don't know if this would be possible, is open up the realm where the utility spells become open world only. They don't exist in Raid. They don't exist in PvP. They don't exist in Mythic Plus. You cannot use them there. And then at that point, you can hard look at the damage numbers, and that utility side of the game is thrown away. That's no longer viable. You can't sit there and say, like, I don't have Door of Shadows, I don't have Venthyr, I don't have the Kyrian Purifying Tonic, I don't have Fleshcraft. Those are no longer a part of any content other than just world questing. They're cool, they're niche, they're interesting. And every player who was pretty much playing the game during Nazjatar said this. Benthic gear is neat. Why do I have to have it in Raid? And suddenly that was from a normal level to a mythic level, where you had players like, I'm not grinding pearls. And then you had a large majority of the player base that's going, pearl grinding it is again. Like, that's the normalcy of it. And there's some people that are like, I love islands. And then there's a huge portion of the players that are just like, I guess I'm just chained to my chair now. Like, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this.
Wait, someone who said, I like islands?
Oh, yeah, there's people out there who had the achievement for islands. I know a guy.
Wow.
He was like, I love this, dude. I've gotten all the achievements for island. And I was like,
yeah. I mean, so you just want to be able to switch the utility, not the damage.
I mean, I think the utility should be thrown out. I think it should be open world only. And then at that point, the damage numbers are irrelevant. One will feel objectively worse or better, but as long as you kind of feel, the single target one's really good. Well, there's this high prio target I can take care of in Mythic Plus. That's cool, or maybe, as long as the damage numbers are not so radically imbalanced, a la races, it's fine. But the context right now is more the utility side of it, and that needs to go away. They need to put that on a shelf and be like, that's pretty. That's a pretty idea. We'll leave that out there for world quests.
All right.
So what about you now? You got any ideas?
I did. So I like the idea of overall engagement. And what I mean by that is I would do something where you would pick your initial covenant and you would be locked. That would be your choice that you got freely. And there would be, like somewhat what you guys were saying, there's some type of NPC or emissary or espionage agent within your covenant, and you would collect tokens from the other zones or just out in the world, which you could turn into this espionage agent to kind of go undercover as this other covenant for a limited amount of time. And I would make those tokens kind of like the Aldor or Scryer tokens, and they could be ones that players could potentially sell. So let's say you need, 100 of these tokens to get an hour's worth of using, a Venthyr Covenant ability if you've picked Kyrian. So now you have players who are happy with their choice, they can collect these tokens, throw them in the auction house, and make some money if they don't want to be switching. And you have other players who have a way of engaging with the other Covenant abilities for a limited amount of time. And they can choose to spend gold or the market value, whatever it ends up balancing out to play with this certain ability for a certain amount of time. And my caveat with it is I would make it locked for a period of time. I wouldn't make it something where, okay, you bought it and now you have it till you buy something else, which I could also see being a potential avenue if they went with it. I like the idea. I'm still in the camp of I like the idea of you having to make an initial choice. I think it brings a lot of depth to the game, but regardless, that would just be my idea for how they could implement playing with the other Covenant abilities, but still having some level of impact for the choice that you made.
Gotcha.
So I think we can have final arguments here. Where are people sitting after our what is now an hour and 45-minute conversation or debate?
Jeez.
So I'll let Luigi and Tiny can go first, and then Janai and I will finish up. Try and keep it as concise as possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's really not much more to add on my end. Like we've talked everything through like crazy already. I just feel the way I feel that we should be able to swap in some capacity, and that's about it.
And
Cool.
from my side of it, I think the easiest thing Blizzard can do for player bases is strip the utility out. Don't leave it just to be in the open world. It's a cosmetic choice along with your Covenant, and that's great. And then they can balance the numbers later, and I think that would alleviate a lot of this weight that I think players are now feeling for choice.
Cool. Janai?
So I think, I mean, I guess the only two things I really have is I want to live in a world where the non-optimal covenants see play. I will concede that as a subclass, they're not really that fleshed out. So, having to reroll to another shaman just to play with this other ability kind of sucks. But I want to live in a world where the non-optimal covenants see play. So however that happens, and locking them is one way. And the other thing would be from a gameplay standpoint, it is just like classes, right? So anyone who's saying, "Oh, this is the apocalypse," like I've never had to choose something before, well, you have. It's like your class. So that's all. Those are my points. On to you, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a similar camp, obviously. I like the idea of there being a lot of depth to the game, and I want to live in a world, certainly as someone who runs a guild and is very cognizant on, the loyalty of my players, the people that have been here for a long time, and then also weighing the side of the competitive nature. I like there being a world where I can say, okay, maybe I'm bringing the enhanced shaman as opposed to the windwalker monk, but the enhanced shaman is bringing his own support through Wind Fury now, and the windwalker monk brings their own support through whatever the touch is called, where they do physical damage. I would like covenants to kind of be viewed in that sense, where each covenant has its own unique pros that it brings, as well as its own unique cons. And I'm not forced to tell everyone, hey, you have to switch X, Y, and Z, because at least from my point of view, there have often been times of friction just within the community and dealing with people when those instances happen. I mean, there's a couple I can think of. One big example would be in BFA when we got to what was the boss in Uldir? I think Festergut, the one that was like the Hydra-looking one that made the spores.
Fetid Devourer.
Fetid Devourer, that's it.
Yeah.
Arcane was very good at knocking out those little growths. And because mages could switch to Arcane, even though most of the other fights they could play and liked playing the other spec, I was forced to tell these mages, go respec and do this, because this is an extremely difficult fight and we need you to be optimal now. And it felt like the fight was designed or potentially functioning in a manner where that was the expectation. And I don't like being put in a position where that's what I have to do. on a regular basis. And I would like the game to be balanced around a whole depth and breadth of abilities that characters can bring, where I don't feel bad that I've brought someone who has ability A and B versus someone else who has ability, X and Y. And I would agree with Tiny in the sense that the utility-based abilities are kind of the ones that I think are really on the high power end. However, I don't agree that they should only be in world content. I would much rather feel them throughout the entirety of the expansion. I feel like that's a big point of having an expansion, is to have this new playability with the new stuff they add. And I would like just to see that the game be balanced, and Blizzard balancing the game around the fact that not everybody can have an on-demand shield or an on-demand blink, etc. So, yeah, we're close to 2 hours. I want to thank everybody for joining in to the conversation and listening to us debate back and forth. I don't know if anyone has really budged from their initial point of view, but at the same point, that wasn't necessarily the goal to begin with. It was just to create a space where everybody can freely share what they were thinking about each of the covenants. So, very eager to see what Blizzard ends up doing, and I thank everyone for spending some time with us and watching our first design debate. Thank you very much. Goodbye.